biological critters, blah, blah, blah. So that's already done, so I'll skip that page. No, not really. I might as well start properly. Hello, thanks for coming and listening today. I hope we can have some fun and watch some clips of some films. I'm definitely not an academic. So just foreground that. That's the first part, and we can take that to pieces later. So the title, is Animism is the only sensible version of materialism. I've already been picked up on the fact on the Facebook posting, people thought that was a quote from me. So I've already got in trouble for my practice of appropriating text from other people for titles. Even this paper today, I was tempted to just read all the citations without saying where they're from, but I think that's probably not allowed either. That's kind of why I quit my PhD in London, because of this problem of my obsession of citing without quotation marks, which was a method borrowed from, I can't remember, some German philosopher. Anyway, jokes aside. So, as Myrna said, this quote is it's from a personal email communication between Eduardo Viveiros de Castro, a Brazilian anthropologist or ethnologist, as he likes to term himself nowadays. Isn't that right, Anna? And Donna Haraway. And I like that fact that it comes from an email communication, because one of the films that we will watch some clips from today, Lettres du Voyant, is actually a film based on an exchange of emails between a filmmaker, perhaps me, and a Ghanaian email scammer. But what's interesting about this quote from Eduardo Viveiros de Castro, so it discusses this relationship of animism to materialism and how both of these approaches to thinking are brought into being through the senses. Indeed, this proposition could be understood as having two senses itself. Perhaps that animism is the only real approach to materialism, the clearest and most sensible way to think materialism. But also it could be understood that he means that the animism as an experience of the body and the mind together is the only way that materialism can be apprehended through the senses. But really these are just two ways of saying the same thing, I think. So I'm going to try and discuss this today by drawing this into relation with these two films that Myrna talked about, Lettres du Voyant from 2013 and All That Is Solid from 2014. These are two films that I made in West Africa that take an archaeological materialist perspective on the colonial history and neo-colonial present in Ghana. And this is inquired into through a reading of certain uses of computer technology and the internet in Ghana, and the ways in which these uses intertwine with the search for precious metals within the ground, such as gold mining, and also in computers themselves, such as e-waste recycling. So within these films, animism as a form of thought and experiential practice is posited as a method of resistance to neo-colonial capitalist projects. So to begin with, I'm going to read a quote, or not to begin because I've already begun, but to begin in the second sense, I will read a quote from every art conference's favorite white French philosopher, Gilles Deleuze. Excuse me. But it's a great quote. Give me a body then. This is a formula of a philosophical reversal. The body is no longer the obstacle that separates thought from itself, that which it has to overcome to reach thinking. It is, on the contrary, that which it plunges into or must plunge into in order to reach the unthought, that is life. It is through the body, and no longer the intermediary of the body, that cinema forms its alliance with the spirit, with thought. Give me a body then is first to mount the camera on an everyday body. That's the end of the quote. So here I find this particularly interesting because, Deleuze on the one hand is challenging a traditional Platonic sort of dualism that posits the body, as he says, as an obstacle to be overcome in order to reach pure thought, rational knowledge. He's proposing the body not as a mere vessel for important mental activity, but rather as the site in which thought can be made possible through this co-production of body and mind. But more importantly for what we have at hand today, is that he suggests that cinema, through mounting the camera onto a body and off the apparatus of a tripod, is able to create an alliance with the spiritual and express actions of thought with the body, not merely the body as a character on screen, for example. I mean, that too, but not just that. So what we have is a kind of embodied image that thinks, that speaks, that sees, that moves, that is animated. Perhaps an animistic image. So this is something I try to approach with this film, L'Être du Voyant, which I'll discuss a bit more in a minute, as an attempt at a sort of, well, I was going to say an anti-ethnographic gesture, but perhaps not, more a sort of critical inquiry, really, into images and forms of narration in the ethnographic cinema, particularly of Jean Rouch, especially focusing on his interest to become other through his, as he called them, ciné-trance, his kind of embodied camera experiences of going into, as he calls, a kind of ciné-trance. Again, turning to Deleuze, who he speaks about Rouch's film Moi en Noir as an attempt by Rouch to actually flee his own skin, to try and get out of his own sort of dominative culture, his own whiteness, and to become other through the forces of fiction. Rouch's film title literally translates as Me, a Black. And one of the ways in which Rouch attempted such a process is through mounting the camera on his body and dancing with the gods of West African animists, like in films. I'm going to show a clip actually in a minute from a film called Teru et Biti, Les Tambours d'Avant. And for Rouch, this was a way, precisely to try and step outside of his own culture, which was, he was a French filmmaker making films in the 50s and 60s and 70s in ex-French colonies in West Africa. I'm just going to show a little clip.
Le 11 mars 1971, après 3 années de disette, les habitants du village de Simiri, aux Armaganda du Niger, organisaient une danse de possession pour demander au génie de la brousse la protection des récoltes futures contre les sauterelles. Le 15 mars, Daouda Sorko, fille du prêtre Zimma responsable Daouda Sibdo, nous demandait d'assister au 4e jour de cette cérémonie pour laquelle on avait fait appel aux tambours archaïques, Tourou et Bitti. Vers la fin de l'après-midi, aucun danseur n'ayant été possédé, nous décidions, le preneur de son Moussa Amidou et moi-même à la caméra, de réaliser, malgré tout, un plan séquence d'une dizaine de minutes afin de conserver un document filmé dans le temps réel sur ces tambours d'avant qui très bientôt se tairaient à jamais. Ainsi a été entrepris cet essai de cinéma ethnographique à la première personne.
I'll just leave it playing. So it's this phrase at the end where he says that he's trying to do a type of ethnographic cinema in the first person, which is something I'll try and pick up on and sort of problematize a little bit. And it's interesting too, actually, just to go back to what Sally Jane was just saying about the camera being used as a lens within field research as a way in which to sort of kind of activate different events, different things. And actually with this film, Rouch claimed that, you know, he turned up to the village that these people are trying to be mounted by these spirits, and it wasn't happening, and they were waiting for a long time. And Rouch claims that when he walked into the scene with his camera, his presence of him plus camera actually activated the sort of desired outcome of the ritual. And Rouch was actually, as an ethnographer, taking part in the actual process of, you know, of allowing the gods to enter the bodies of the priests. I'll just read a quick quote from Rouch. He says, "For me then, the only way to film is to walk with the camera, taking it where it is most effective and improvising another type of ballet with it, leading or following a dancer, priest or craftsman. He is no longer himself, but a mechanical eye, accompanied by an electronic ear. It is this strange state of transformation that takes place in the filmmaker that I have called ciné trance. So, in discussing this potential metamorphic transformation of Rouche through cinematic trance, Deleuze turns to Arthur Rimbaud, the famous French poet, and his famously strange line, Je est un autre, I is another. With this sentence, Rimbaud indicates two coexisting sides to being and suggests, I believe, a materialist reading of subjectivity, in the sense that he distances the I from the first person, I is and not I am, and makes of it an object that exists within a body, that becomes other, perhaps, in the I of somebody else. Furthermore, he suggests the possibility for fictionalizing that I, for fictionalizing the narrator that speaks as I. Rimbaud wanted to fabulate this becoming other, this exterior I, through what he termed a complete derangement of all the senses. And for Rimbaud, this can come about through a ritualistic process of trance-inducing states, such as poisoning, love, madness, sufferance. And Rimbaud writes about this in his famous Lettres du Voyant, from which I take the film's title. These are two letters that Rimbaud wrote in 1871, just after his experience in the Paris Commune, to his friends Georges Zamba and Paul Demeny, in which he describes his desire to become a voyant, a seer, which really is just another way for Rimbaud to say a poet. And I think this perhaps in many ways relates to Pier Paolo Pasolini's cinema of poetry, which Pasolini described through the elaboration of a free, indirect, subjective style of writing certain images in cinema. Images that express a way of seeing, a point of view of a character, that nonetheless is also the director's point of view and constructed through the camera. So it's this, again, an idea of a sort of objectified first-person point of view, which actually takes on two different forms of subjectivity at the same time. So this is a kind of shared subjectivity that oscillates and mutates between different states of being, different things, and being different things on similar and shared planes of experience. Basically, this idea, again, of becoming other. There, I'll stop Rouche. That's what my notes tells me to do. Okay, I'll just show a quick clip from my film Lettres du Voyant. Do I need to take that one down? No. Sorry, technical hitch. Voila.
Dear Louis, now you know the truth. Let's move on. You need help, so help me too. You want to know more, so let me show you. I will show you what I know, and I will show you more. Mamin Shemmao, let me see for you.
So I'll just stop it there. That's just the beginning part of the film, within which we have this camera movement of a body walking towards a series of screens, and on the screens we can see images of Ghanaian films that fictionalize different accounts of experiences with what they call juju, which is it's the Ghanaian, or it's one form of Ghanaian animist practice. And then there's this text which follows, which is from this email scammer who is actually addressing me, the filmmaker, and says, let me see for you. So the idea of that film that then unfolds is that all the images that are being shown in that throughout the film in the different locations that we're taking to are actually being made by this narrator, this person, this fictionalized other. The film oscillates between images that have been recorded by a camera in the real world, photographic images, representations of reality, and also, which you'll see in a minute, digitized representations of real objects. So I used the camera and a laser scanner to make digital interpretations of real spaces. So even the way in which the images are being constructed in the film, they also, it sort of moves between different, I suppose, forms of understanding representations of reality. Good. So just to elaborate a bit on this further, I'll turn again to the work of Viveros de Castro, who has developed a long project of an ontological turn in anthropology, as what he terms a creation of a permanent decolonization of thought. His research is focused on the sharing of philosophical knowledge with Amerindian tribes in the Amazon rainforest in Brazil, and he has co-developed what he calls, and I quote, a materialist theory of the subject as a material subject. And for Viveros de Castro, what this has entailed in part is learning from the Amerindian a different perspective on the creation of beings in the world, and what or who is human or not, and a rethinking of the Western relationship of culture to nature, and thus in turn a rethinking of traditional Western ontology that has founded and so restricted the practice of anthropology. He describes the way in which the Amerindian people, well, actually, I'm going to read a quote from him again. Like I said, this might be quite quote heavy today, but I think that could be fun. Because I said it, he says it better. So I'm going to quote at length. We believe, this is him, we believe, for example, that what people have in common with animals is material, a body. Whereas among the indigenous, myths always begin with a time when every living being was a human. But in the end, the aim is to explain how certain beings stopped being human. These beings left humanity to become animals or objects. With our myths in Western culture, it is exactly the opposite. In the beginning, we were all animals or pure material. Certain of us then became humanized. So we have heroic tales of humanity conquering nature, which is an alterity from the point of view of culture. Culture as modern soul, something that distinguishes us from the rest of creation. Whereas among the Amazon Indians, it's exactly the opposite. In their view, we are all in the world. Humans merely have a particular materiality. What makes us human, as such, is our body, not our soul. Our soul is the most common thing in the world. And then he finishes by saying everything is animated. You see, animism. So in this account, according to these Amerindian shamans of the Amazon, And this can also be applied to animist thought. I mean, it's not exactly the same, and I'm making a gross anthropological error to say it's the same, but it's a similar way of thinking, a similar worldview that is shared also with West African animist traditions. And I mean, the thing that's particularly interesting is at the moment in the Dominican Republic, I've been talking to people that practice Santeria, which is a form of animist practice in the Dominican Republic. There's quite a few different forms. You also have Haitian voodoo, you have Palo, Santeria, other things. And Santeria is actually a syncretic practice because it's a sort of, how would you term it, a kind of an amalgam or an assemblage of different belief systems. So it takes on board Catholic kind of imagery and symbolism, whilst also at the same time it has taken certain elements from Amerindian mythology and also West African, which is obviously specifically very related to the island itself and its whole colonial history. So, what differentiates us is the material basis of our different bodies, whether we're human beings, trees, rocks, water, or the sky. Not the idea that only humans have the capability to think, to be rational, or to have a spirit, because everything in an originary sense is human. So subjectivity is taken as something very material because all matter has subjectivity. The subject is outside, it is everywhere. And this form of thinking stands in defiance to the creation of subjectivity by the state, the processes of subjectivation that are made through and make up societies of discipline and control. And Viveros de Castro thinks this in relation to Pierre Clastres' idea of a society against the state. And he elaborates on this and he says, you know, if the state creates subjectivity, then the state is the self. So if we can think of a society against the state, it's precisely a kind of society that works against this insistence of an interiority of the self, contained within itself. It's a society that only recognizes itself while being outside of itself. This, for Viveros de Castro, is animism. And this is his materialist theory of the subject as what he calls the ontology of societies against the state. So, to develop on this a bit, I'm going to speak about Sueli Rolnik, a Brazilian psychoanalyst and writer, who thinks along similar lines and speaks of the ways in which animist thought and practices can work at unleashing potential generative and creative processes in thought and in being and life that have been repressed and oppressed by European colonialism in Africa and South America. She speaks similarly of animist thought as being in opposition to the modern construction of the self that's governed by identitarian principles within a society of control, and suggests instead the activation of different modes of being and different capacities of the body through other means of subjectivation that do not follow the state guardianship of the modern subject. So, a quote from her now. From a visible and macro-political point of view, there is the repression and censorship of these cultures. And from a micro-political point of view, there is an inhibition of potentialities and of vital power, an inhibition of experiencing the world through affect, an inhibition of accessing sensation in order to put thought at the service of the process of actualization. All this remains under repression. I call this kind of repression colonial repression. The problem is then to activate this power and capacity in ourselves. So one way in which Rolnik suggests this kind of opening up of these repressed creative capacities and thus resist colonial repression is through generating subjectivation on a different level through animist trance rituals. She describes how the act of receiving the gods in Afro-Brazilian trance rituals is a form of becoming subject through the contagious processes of a collective assemblage of enunciation, as she terms it, which is sensed through the body and creates frictions between sensations and potentialities. So here, the development of the self is again something that's dependent on exterior factors, on the collective assemblage of different subjectivities shared on one plane. That of the body undergoing the trance, brought into contamination with the gods that is mounting the body, and the other people taking part in the ritual. An animist ritual is always a collective process. You have musicians, you have priests, you might have animals, you will have alcohol, you will have the space that you're in. Perhaps also, in Jean Rouche's case, the camera person filming the event. And I believe, though I start to think, that cinema could potentially have quite a lot to do with this. Can we start to understand cinema itself as a site in which a collective assemblage, through the shared experience of multiple perspectives, both on and off the screen, can start to take place? Can the experience of viewing cinema in a particular way that is not necessarily confined by certain identitarian or classical principles or of classical narrative and form, could this perhaps allow for an opening up of new creative potentials and thus propose a rethinking of the construction of subjectivity as a material and collective thing? And thus, the question that we actually started with, can cinema work towards a decolonization of thought in, about, and through cinema? I'm just going to show another clip from this film, Lettres du Voyant. Now, this is a moment in the film where we have just experienced the processes of a sacrificial ritual in which some animals are killed. I decided not to show that part, and I will just show what happens afterwards.
All that is solid melts into air. All that is holy is profaned.
To facilitate the execution of their traditional duties. Mr. Speaker, a strong parliament is a strong democracy. Strengthening parliament is also a crucial element in managing a successful transition to middle-income status. This includes ensuring that parliament has the capacity to play its oversight role effectively. Mr. Speaker, the Job 600 project, which will ensure that members of parliament can operate from decent offices, is almost complete. MPs can expect to be furnished with new laptops with full internet connectivity. To be furnished with new laptops with full internet connectivity. To facilitate communication between their offices and their constituents, as promised in the NDC manifesto.
The night was clear and warm. The moon shone mild over the hills and evoked strange visions in all creatures. Itself like a dream of the sun, the moon hovered over the dream world, brooding within itself. And it led nature, divided into countless separate entities, back to that primeval mythical age when every bud and gem still slept by itself, lonely and untouched, yearning in vain to unfold the obscure wealth of its own immeasurable existence.
Okay, I'll stop it there. It's kind of strange to play that clip out of context of the rest of the film. Oh, I can't see anything anymore. That's nice. Because, so what happens in this section of the film, I think there's sort of there's three transformations taking place, and there's supposed to be a fourth transformation. The first transformation is this man who was a member of the group that were conducting this ritual in Ghana. He's in the process, he's already been mounted by one of the spirits, and he's now in the process of sort of furthering the trance through dance. So that's one transformation that you're experiencing, or you're looking at. You're watching somebody go through the processes of a trance-induced transformation. So he's mounting someone else's subjectivity. He's mounting a spirit. Then we also have this transformation of the sound, the modulation of the actual recording of the drums of the ritual, which has been put through a series of digital processes to start to kind of change it and abstract it into this different melodic forms. So that was done by my sound. I can't really explain that very well because he's a sound designer and he did it, and I don't know how to use the software that he uses, but he's pretty clever at that kind of stuff, and maybe it's very simple, I think. And but so there's this digital modulation of the sound recordings. Then the third transformation is the sequence you see at the end with all these objects made out of dots. they're actually really existing architectural monuments in the capital of Ghana, in Accra, which were built after 1957 to celebrate the independence of Ghana from the grips of English colonialism. And the way that they were made was by, again, taking photographs of these really existing objects and then using computer software to transform them into what we call point clouds. And then they're turned into sort of three-dimensional digital objects and then put into the space of the moving image there. And then the fourth transformation that's supposed to happen is that if you're watching the film in its entirety and you're sort of being led and seduced by this narrative, that this moment, it comes in precisely the middle of the film, and you have this sequence with these bright colors that just suddenly come. And originally, when the film was first shown in a rather large auditorium with very good sound, and the sound actually travels around the room as we hear the drums going, it's supposed to bring the viewer themselves into try to induce a different sort of state of experiencing the film itself. So this idea that perhaps there can be a transformation from the screen into the space of the actual auditorium and what that might create as a sort of collective experience, as a potentially kind of animistic experience, perhaps. So then I think now I'm going to talk a bit more about the way, or how this film relates to the internet. So it's a shame we couldn't show the whole film, because it would have been easier that way, but instead I'll just sort of describe it. The film looks into this phenomenon in Ghana that was, I don't know when it started, I think around sort of mid-2000s. It became very prominent in sort of 2008, 2009, and then by the time, or 2010 even, I think was a pretty high point. And then I went to Ghana in 2013, and this phenomenon that I'm about to describe had started to sort of dwindle as such. It's this thing called Sakawa. And Sakawa is basically the practice of email scamming to get money. I sort of assume everyone's familiar with email scams. I'm sure you've all received in your time some email scams. And email scamming became increasingly difficult to do because people started to become savvy to what it really was about. And, you know, when you get an email explaining that, a prince from some region somewhere has $10 million and wants to give them to you, you probably rather reluctantly give across your credit card details or something. So people had to find different ways to make this practice lucrative. And in Ghana particularly, someone said this to me when I was there. They said, well, if you want money or you want a visa or you need something, you can pray onto the Bible every day, but it will take years. It will take a long, long time. With juju, you can go and it can be done in a week. But there's a very dangerous possibility that then you might be tied into a contract with the juju priest, which means that every single week for the rest of your life, you have to bring him something, otherwise you will die. So it's this kind of gamble. How much do you need the money? How much do you need the visa? Do you pray on the Catholic Bible, or do you visit the juju priest? Or you probably do a bit of both, or not just Catholic, depending. If you're a Muslim, then obviously you wouldn't be praying on the Bible. Because also in Ghana too, this juju traditional belief system mixes in with Islam and also Catholicism. Actually, my grandmother, or my grandfather's second wife, so my mother's stepmother, my step-grandmother, is Ghanaian, and she grew up a Catholic, and she was, educated by nuns in a very strict Catholic upbringing in a small town in the middle of Ghana called Kumasi. And, she grew up very much believing that, and she still is very much Catholic. But nonetheless, in the house where she lives in Kumasi, there's always stools that are empty, but if there's an empty stool, you have to put a cushion on the stool, so a bad spirit won't come and sit on the stool. And things like that. And also she used to say to me that, she would go to church on Sunday with her mother, and then they would go visit her grandmother, who lived in a village nearby, and the grandmother would take her straight away to visit the juju priest in the village to sort of try and get rid of some of that Catholicness. And she'd say, no, come on, you need to, now you must visit. So it's very much, again, a sort of syncretic bringing together of these different ways of thinking. Anyway, and Sakawa these guys would go to the juju priest and do a ritual to gain some extra human powers that would actually enable them to spiritually embody and enter the internet. And this is true, this really, really happened for quite some period of time in Ghana. There's even a book written about it by an anthropologist from America called Jenna Burrell, so that classifies it as true. It's a very good book, actually. And they travel inside the internet to arrive at your place of dwelling and to then also spiritually embody you, get into your mind and try and convince you to perhaps send them some money. And the thing that particularly interested me when I was doing the research for this film was that, a few times that I came across these stories of what they call Sakawa boys in Ghana, was that they said, well, we're justified in doing these thefts because we're just trying to steal back some of the riches that were stolen from us during times of colonialism. Now, this was a deeply problematic justification of theft because most of the people that they were targeting were like Americans or Canadians or not necessarily British or Portuguese or Dutch colonists. Nonetheless, it was an interesting provocation. But the thing that particularly fascinated me was not just the stealing back of the colonial gold, but also this idea of a spiritual transformation and kind of embodiment of the space of the internet. So this, for me, was a very material way of understanding the possibilities that the internet might offer, and that the internet was far at all from being something immaterial or ephemeral or that exists in this sort of clouded space above us. It's actually a very hard, solid space full of tubes, that are full of Ethernet cables, or tubes, I like to call them, because I think of a tube as more of a device for shooting oneself down. And this was quite interesting because, when we use the internet, I think everyone's quite well aware of that, is that obviously we are traveling in space and time. Even when I'm seated here, there's a certain sense of me going somewhere else. So I can use Google Maps to go and visit, certain parts of Ghana to have a look, and you can look at Google Photos, and you can, there's a certain sense of a sort of travel within time and space. But also this idea of a kind of a transformation of oneself is something that we're all practicing on the internet all the time through Facebook or Twitter or different forms of sort of self-promotion online is also just another way of kind of fictionalizing oneself in this space of the internet. And it was interesting that when I went to Ghana to speak to people about this practice, Sakawa, for them it was very clear. They said, but that's what the internet does. Therefore, we can use the internet for the same purposes. So this connection of gold, Ghana, before it was called Ghana, was called the Gold Coast. So it was really exploited for its huge quantities of gold, mostly by the British, and now by a Canadian firm. There's I can't remember the name, but a large Canadian mining firm that pretty much organized all of the gold mining in Ghana. And then also on the other side, you have lots of illegal gold mining, which is mostly Chinese. Illegal gold mines that are set up in the central region of Ghana. They're illegal, but then the government knows that they exist and allows them to exist because the government take a slight slice of money, and it sort of works out somehow, even though apparently it's not supposed to happen. So this interest in this search for gold through the internet and its relationship with this colonial history of Ghana also led me to this other space called Agbogboshe, which is one of the largest e-waste recycling grounds in the world. It's a place, I don't know if you're familiar with Agbogboshe or with those kind of sites, but it's a place where if you recycle a computer here, you might send it to a recycling plant. Well, more often than not, the computer's not really recycled. It just gets put into a shipping container and sent off to the coast of West Africa, or there's also a big village in China too, where there's lots of recycling of e-waste. And one of these is in the capital, in Accra. So I went to film there to look at the way in which people were breaking apart computers themselves to also extract precious metals. So again, it was this idea of using technology to try and extract precious metal for a sort of lucrative, for making money. I will show you one other clip. That might explain that a bit better. I need to do this again.
But also, as I pointed out, that also entails hard work.
The miners of Ghana, my subterranean heroes.
Boss, 93.7 FM.
In the solemn, quiet company of the primeval rocks, inside nature's dark and marvelous chambers, it seems that these miners are equipped to receive heavenly gifts and to be joyfully elevated from the earth and its difficulties. Inside the mine, heaven and earth are all of a sudden far away, and the dark broad halls appear to belong to a strange subterranean realm within which time and space become compressed. I can move over and beyond national boundaries, under the sea and the sunken streets of Atlantis. Through the sub-ocean Ethernet cables, I travel against the southeasterly Atlantic currents, bringing back the brilliant king of metals to his dark home. I haunt the technological. Agblubushi, the waste ground, a vision of the future. I too was a miner here. We would mine for precious metals, gold, silver, copper, but often finding only nickel, aluminium, zinc, tin, lead, or iron. These could all be extracted from a computer that had traveled from afar. Alchemists we were, turning base metals into noble metals in order to find an elixir of immortality. I found it. In Agbogbloshie, I came to collect parts to build my traveling machines. A hard drive, a motherboard, or a screen could all be found. At a later stage, my friend and I found that we could mine for information here too. Amongst the dead hard drives we brought back to life, we would find email addresses, bank account information, and holiday pictures from across all oceans. It was here that we first started Sakawa. Here that we learned to travel through the ether. Here that we learned how to extract gold from the internet.
So that was a clip from the place Agbogbloshie, in which you see the actual processes of people breaking down computer hardware to extract. In this instance, these people you're watching here are extracting bits of metal. I mean, there's not a lot, but there's some. And if you do it again and again and again, obviously it accumulates and you can make some money. But also what you hear on the soundtrack is the narrator describing how the Sakawa boys, and this was something, okay, here it's fictionalized, but this is something I had also read about, is that Agbogbloshie was a place that people would go to find old hard drives, which they would then try and reassemble and extract information from, like he says, photographs that could be used to then construct a false identity online to do it, because internet scamming, a lot of it is based on the construction of a false identity online. But also bank details, there's other bits of information about people that they could use to piece together their own narratives, their own stories. That's something I was going to talk about today, but in the end I won't. But it's another piece of work I made called Lies More Real Than Reality, which again is it's a conversation between me and a Beninese email scammer. And I find the practice of email scamming really interesting, actually, as a filmmaker, because email scammers are quite incredible writers of fiction. Because email scamming has actually worked for a lot of people. They have made quite a lot of some people have made quite a lot of money. They really fooled people into believing that their stories exist. It's way better than I have ever managed to do with my films, or that a novel might do. This is actually somebody, well, I guess it's what politicians do too. You just, convince people to believe your lies. But the email scammer does it with such fluidity and excellence that it's something to be remarked upon, perhaps. So I haven't got much longer, and I would like to show this film, All That Is Solid, in its entirety. It's only 15 minutes, so it's quite good to show in its entirety. We still have got an hour left, actually, but we may want to have Q&A. But I just really want to quickly just talk about, again, this relationship of this materialism, how it relates to technology, and then also animism. Is that so? On the one hand, we have these Sakawa boys that are trying to use the space of the internet to spiritually inhabit the space, the material space of the internet, to get back this material substrate that comes from the earth, gold. But we're also hearing this whilst we're looking at images of people that are doing a similar process of extracting metals from computers. And then then that, for me, this sort of geological understanding of or this way of understanding the geological basis of technology itself too might perhaps suggest something kind of animistic. The text that you hear prior to this is actually from Novalis. It's a book from the 18th century called Heinrich von Ofterdingen, which is an account of a young man that goes on a voyage to become a poet. It's kind of similar to Rimbaud's quest. It's all sort of tied in. And he has a very, Novalis, as a German romantic, had a very kind of animistic sense of geology and of nature. And the way that he describes the experiences of Heinrich von Ofterdingen within the caves and within the sort of solid surface of the earth raises this sort of spiritual subjectivation, in fact, of the young Heinrich von Ofterdingen. He becomes a poet through his interaction and engagement with the life forces that live inside the earth, inside the mines. He visits mines and speaks to miners, and he has this sort of spiritual conversation with miners about the universe and the stars and the relationship of the stars to the rocks in which they're mining for precious metals. So if we can think of a kind of a life force that exists inside geological compounds of rock, that they might also be the life sources, then the forces of nature inside the technology that animates our computers, that seem alive when in fact they're not. They are also just pieces of metal and glass and plastic. But I mean, look at the way that Apple, treats its own technology. It's very much a living being that exists amongst us in the world. Your iPhone is your friend. Your iPad speaks back to you when you ask it stuff. Hey, iPad, do you want a coffee? Yeah, let's go to Starbucks. It's down the road. That kind of relationship that we have with technology currently is quite intriguing and strange. Wendy Chun talks about code as a type of fetish as well, as a sort of a fetishistic spiritual kind of life force that actually animates software that sort of makes us believe that our computers are perhaps something living and alive too. But then what I'm interested in looking at is that then perhaps also this MacBook here is full of life itself because of its gold and its copper and its nickel. It's actually got kind of elements of living activity in there which are making it happen. So, I don't know, that's something I'm thinking about right here now on the stage with you. But just before I show all that is solid, I'm just going to show you another quick clip. It's only 1 minute long, and this is great. It's actually an advert from this American tech company called SAP HANA. Does anyone know more about SAP HANA? I'm sorry, I'm really not that tech hardcore kind of thing. Anyone sort of transmedially crowd here? No. SAP HANA? They do stuff with data and data storage and stuff. I don't know what they do. But I saw this clip online, and for me, so if we can think about this proposition of Eduardo Viveros de Castro that animism is the ontology of society against the state, well, I would actually say no, I don't think so. Perhaps animism has been captured by capitalism, and we could maybe say that animism is the ontology of capitalism as it relates to technology. And this clip is, I'm not being cynical, I'm being quite serious here, which is perhaps why, there's this great text by Isabel Stengers called Reclaiming Animism. Maybe there is a great need to reclaim what that term might mean before it gets sort of grossly misconstrued for the purposes of selling technology. So I'll play the clip and you'll get a slightly better idea of that. Do I need to do that? Yes. It's very quick.
Can a business have a mind, a subconscious, a power to store every experience and call upon it through something called intuition? Can a company have reflexes, a nervous system, the ability to react precisely and correctly, faster than the speed of thought? Can an enterprise have a sixth sense, a knack for predicting the future? a business have a spirit? Can a business have a soul? Can a business be alive?
I mean, that's a challenge as an artist. I mean, I'm sorry, that's better than anything I could ever make. It's powerful. I mean, I'm convinced. I'm pretty convinced. And I love that. Can a business have a mind? Can a business have a soul? Can a business be alive? I mean, yeah. It is. That's it. The answer's simple. Yes. It's Saphana. Which is perfect. So, oh, wait a second. We've only got 15 minutes left, and the film is 15 minutes, and I was supposed to talk about new research, but we can talk about it later. So I'm going to show this film now. All That Is Solid. Give it a very brief introduction. So this is a film in which I focused more specifically on this processes of recycling dead technology and bringing it to life. The search for precious metals within technology, etc. But the film itself is a recycling of the previous film you've just seen, well, not the Saphana, the clips of Lettres du Voyant. So this film, All That Is Solid, came out of a certain sort of economic pressure, I suppose. I mean, I was broke, let's put it that way, at a moment in my life, and I wanted to make a new piece of work. It was actually made for an exhibition in Paris, and as we know, often these sort of things don't pay, so, you know, I had to find a way to make a work within my sort of economic means at that time, and, you know, I was spending a heck of a lot of time in my bedroom, on my laptop, as one does, on the internet, and sort of looking through material and things. So you'll see how that kind of ended up into the film. So it's a recycling of my own experiences during that period, and it's a recycling of my own work that focuses on recycling. And I think we can watch it now. Okay. You've seen this a few times.
tell you of a new method of teaching simple English. I am now going to start my lesson. Me, you, me, you. Me. 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 You. 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 This is me. That is you. That is you. Him. Her. Her. That is him. That is him. That is him. That is him. That is her. That is her. That is her.
Là, on met les poudres d'or qu'on fait bouillir. Tu vois, comme les forgerons font. On les fait couler. Et tout ça est bien surveillé par les Anglais et les polices. On fait fondre l'or avec une chaleur exagérée.
Markanga foro dinga fatigue laureno ko bona hani mana il faut course mu fora.
Tu vois maintenant c'est l'or qu'on amène là. Oui, c'est l'or. C'est bouilli. C'est l'eau de l'or si tu veux. On le coule dans des moules spéciales. Il dit
wana goran bede kan wura goywo aga doru mante kan borgo du no fala bon.
Voilà. On renverse la moule. On prend les lingots, on les trempe dans l'eau pour le refroidir. Parce que c'est chaud encore. Ça c'est le vrai or ça. Ça c'est le vrai or.
Wura kimkimono.
Quanto me lembra 30 minutes? Masa. 30 minutes. Masa. Piano rough. Eu vou pescar amanhã,
Mais on envoie ça à Londres, et on le met dans un coffre-fort, ça ne sert à rien à personne.
C'est pour nous couillonner les mauvais or qui est...
Mais oui, c'est pour vous couillonner, ça reste là-bas. Avec les Anglais, ça ne sert à personne. Voilà, les Anglais ont couillonné les Africains. Ils viennent enlever leur or et puis ça y est, ils les emmènent chez eux.
About 10 years ago, we had one of our most important insights, and that was that the PC was going to become the digital hub for your digital life. What did that mean? Well, it meant that that's where you were going to put your digital photos. Where else were you going to put them? Your digital video off your digital camcorder. So, we've got a great solution for this problem. And we think this solution is our next big insight. Just like an iPhone, an iPad, or an iPod Touch. And we're going to move the digital hub, the center of your digital life, into the cloud. Because all these new devices have communications built into them. They can all talk to the cloud whenever they want. And so now some people think the cloud is just a hard disk in the sky, right? And you take a bunch of stuff and you put it in your Dropbox or your iDisk or whatever, and it transfers it up to the cloud and stores it, and then you drag whatever you want back out on your other devices. And so everything happens automatically, and there's nothing new to learn. It just all works. It just works. Now, you might ask, why should I believe them? They're the ones that brought me.
Where is the Microsoft Cloud? In reality, it exists in our vast worldwide network of data centers that provide the foundation for a wide array of online services.
Thanks. Yeah, I just realized I've grossly gone over time and completely misunderstood time today. So let's call that, I was going to swear, I better fuck up. I just want to finish with one quote, and I promise I'm done. Because we did start 15 minutes late. But I just want to, because maybe it was a bit too cynical to show that Sap Hannah advert. And I don't really believe in that. And as I tried to say, that it's a capture of the sort of lure of animism by these kind of companies. So maybe then it is important to suggest a reclaiming of animism. And again, I won't try and say this any better than Isabel Stengers says it. So I'll quote from her off a text called Reclaiming Animism, because it's wonderful. This is just, I think this is a nice way to finish. Reclaiming animism does not mean, then, that we have ever been animist. Nobody has ever been animist, because one is never animist in general, only in terms of assemblages that generate metamorphic transformation and our capacity to affect and be affected, and also to feel, think, and imagine. Animism may, however, be a name for reclaiming these assemblages, since it lures us into feeling that their efficacy is not ours to claim. And against this insistent, poisoned passion of dismembering and demystifying, it affirms that which they all require in order not to enslave us, that we are not alone in the world. And there I finish.